The gallows stood ready in the town square of Dusty Creek, Texas, and 22-year-old Rose McKenna was scheduled to hang at dawn for a murder she did not commit. The year was 1882, and justice moved swiftly in the territories, especially when the accused was a hired girl with no family, and the victim was the son of the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties. Rose sat in her cell, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the cold iron bars, watching the carpenter make final adjustments to the platform that would end her life. She had stopped crying hours ago, her tears dried up like the creek beds in summer, leaving only a hollow ache where hope used to live. The accusations had come fast and merciless. 3 days ago, 17-year-old Thomas Garrett, son of cattle baron Edward Garrett, had been found dead in the stables, his skull cracked open, a bloody shovel lying nearby. Rose had been the one to discover him, her screams bringing the ranch hands running. But instead of sympathy, she had received suspicion. Thomas had been bothering her for weeks, making unwanted advances that grew bolder each day. Everyone knew it. When his father found his son dead and Rose standing over the body, covered in blood from trying to help him, Edward Garrett's grief transformed into rage. He pointed his finger at her and declared her a murderer, and the sheriff, who owed his position to Garrett's influence, had arrested her on the spot. No one had listened to her protests. No one had cared that she had loved her position at the Garrett Ranch, that she had worked honestly and hard for 2 years to send money back to the orphanage in St. Louis where she had grown up. No one wanted to hear that Thomas had cornered her in the kitchen that very morning, that she had pushed him away and run, that she had been in the main house when the murder happened. The trial had lasted less than 2 hours. The judge, also beholden to Garrett, had barely looked at her before pronouncing the death sentence. 26-year-old Jake Sullivan sat in the saloon, his 4th whiskey untouched in front of him, his conscience eating him alive. He was a cowboy, had been since he was 14, working various ranches across Texas and New Mexico. For the past 8 months, he had been employed at the Garrett Ranch, and he was the only person alive who knew the real truth about Thomas Garrett's death. He had seen everything from the hayloft, where he had been mending tack, but fear had kept him silent. Fear of Edward Garrett, fear of losing his job, fear of what speaking up might cost him in a town where power meant everything and truth meant nothing. But now, sitting in the dim light of the saloon, Jake could not live with himself anymore. He thought about Rose, about the few times he had spoken with her. She had a kind smile, always offered the ranch hands fresh biscuits when they came in from the range. She worked from before sunrise until after dark, never complained, never caused trouble. She had honey-colored hair that caught the light, and blue eyes that reminded him of the sky over the Guadalupe Mountains. He had noticed her, more than noticed her if he was honest, but he was just a cowboy with nothing to his name, and she was always so focused on her work that he never found the courage to say more than a polite greeting. He had watched Thomas Garrett hassle her, had seen the fear in her eyes when the boss's son backed her into corners, making suggestions that no decent man would make to a respectable woman. Jake had wanted to intervene, but ranch hierarchy was strict, and Thomas was the future owner of everything. But on that terrible morning, Jake had witnessed something no one else had seen. He had been up in the loft when Thomas had gone into the stables, drunk from a morning of sneaking whiskey. Carl Brewer, the foreman, had followed him in, their voices raised in argument. Jake had stayed quiet, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping, but he heard everything. Carl had been embezzling from the ranch for years, and Thomas had discovered the evidence in the account books. The young man, drunk and reckless, had threatened to tell his father, to see Carl hanged for theft. The argument had escalated, and Jake had peered over the edge of the loft to see Carl grab the shovel, rage contorting his features. The blow had been swift and brutal, Thomas dropping like a stone. Carl had stood there, breathing hard, then had heard Rose's footsteps approaching. He had slipped out the back entrance just as Rose entered through the front. Jake had frozen in terror, watching as Rose had knelt beside Thomas, her hands frantically checking for signs of life, getting covered in his blood. Her screams had brought everyone running, and Jake had climbed down from the loft and joined the crowd, saying nothing, doing nothing, being a coward. He had told himself he would speak up. But when Edward Garrett had pointed at Rose with such certainty, when the sheriff had slapped iron shackles on her wrists, Jake had remained silent. Carl Brewer had stood in the crowd, his face carefully neutral, and Jake had felt the weight of his gaze, a silent warning. But that was 3 days ago, and tomorrow Rose would hang, and Jake knew he would never sleep again, never look at himself in a mirror without seeing a coward and a murderer by omission. He pushed back from the table so hard the chair fell over, startling the other patrons. The barkeep looked up, but Jake was already striding toward the door, his decision made. He would tell the truth, consequences be damned. If it cost him his life, at least he would die with his honor intact. The sheriff's office was closed for the night, but Jake pounded on the door until Sheriff Morton appeared, suspenders hanging by his sides, irritation written across his weathered face. "What in blazes are you doing, Sullivan? It is past midnight." "I need to speak with you about Rose McKenna," Jake said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "She did not kill Thomas Garrett." "I know who did, and I have proof." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You have been drinking. Go sleep it off." "I have not touched a drop tonight," Jake lied, knowing the whiskey on his breath would say otherwise, but not caring. "I was there. I saw everything. Carl Brewer killed Thomas, and Rose McKenna is innocent. I will testify to it." Sheriff Morton studied him for a long moment, and then glanced over Jake's shoulder, as if checking to see who might be listening. "You know what you're saying? You're accusing the foreman of the Garrett Ranch of murder. You are going against Edward Garrett's version of events. That is dangerous talk, boy." "It is the truth," Jake said firmly, "and I will not let an innocent woman hang to protect a thief and a murderer. You can either let me make a statement now, or I will stand on that platform tomorrow and tell everyone assembled what I saw." The sheriff's jaw worked, and for a moment Jake thought he might simply shut the door. But something in Jake's eyes must have convinced him, because he stepped aside. "Get in here. This better be good, Sullivan, because if you are wasting my time, I will lock you up for obstruction." Jake spent the next hour recounting everything he had witnessed, every detail of the argument, the blow, Carl's escape, Rose's innocent discovery of the body. The sheriff listened, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "Why did you not come forward before?" he demanded. "Because I was afraid," Jake admitted, shame coloring his words. "But I cannot live with fear when an innocent woman is about to die. I am here now, and I will testify to everything I saw." Sheriff Morton leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. "Edward Garrett is not going to like this. He wants someone to pay for his son's death, and he has already decided it is the girl." "Then he wants the wrong person," Jake said, "and if you let her hang knowing the truth, you are as guilty as Carl Brewer." The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and an accusation. Finally, the sheriff stood. "I will get the judge. We will need to hold an emergency hearing before dawn. You better be prepared to swear to all this under oath, Sullivan, and you better be prepared for what comes after." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Judge Harrison was roused from his bed, grumbling and complaining until he heard the nature of the emergency. A hearing was convened in the courthouse at 3 a.m, with only a handful of witnesses present. Jake testified, his voice never wavering, his account detailed and consistent. The judge asked pointed questions, trying to poke holes in his story, but Jake had the truth on his side, and truth held up under scrutiny in a way lies never could. At 4:30, the judge ordered Rose McKenna brought from her cell. She appeared like a ghost, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She looked at the assembled men with confusion and lingering despair, not understanding what was happening. When her gaze landed on Jake, he saw her eyes widen in recognition, though they had barely spoken in all the months he had worked at the ranch. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Miss McKenna, New testimony has come to light regarding the death of Thomas Garrett. Jake Sullivan has provided an eyewitness account that contradicts the charges against you. Based on his testimony, I am ordering your immediate release and issuing a warrant for the arrest of Carl Brewer for the murder of Thomas Garrett. Rose swayed on her feet, and Jake moved instinctively, catching her elbow to steady her. She looked up at him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You saved my life," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why? You do not even know me." "I know you are innocent," Jake said simply, "and I know right from wrong, even if it took me too long to find my courage." The sheriff and his deputies left immediately to arrest Carl Brewer, and the judge dismissed the hearing. As the courthouse emptied, Rose stood in the center of the room, her legs shaking, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. Jake waited nearby, unsure what to say, his heart pounding for entirely different reasons now. In the lamplight, even exhausted and terrified, she was beautiful. More than that, she was brave and kind, and he knew in that moment that saving her life was the most important thing he would ever do. "I do not have anywhere to go," Rose said quietly, not looking at him. "Mr. Garrett will not let me back on his ranch, and I do not have money for a room." "You can stay at the boarding house," Jake said quickly. "I will pay for it. You should rest. You have been through hell." She finally met his eyes, and he saw gratitude there, but also something else, something that made his breath catch. "I do not know how to thank you. You risked everything to tell the truth." "You do not owe me anything," Jake said, though his heart disagreed with his words. "I only did what was right." They walked through the dark streets of Dusty Creek together, the town still asleep, unaware that justice had been served in the early morning hours. Jake paid for a week at the boarding house, ignoring the proprietor's curious looks at the strange hour. He walked Rose to her room, and at the door she turned to him again. "Will you come see me tomorrow?" she asked softly. "I would like to thank you properly, and I would like to know the man who saved my life." Jake's mouth went dry, but he managed to nod. "I would like that very much." When dawn broke over Dusty Creek, the gallows stood empty, and Jake Sullivan stood in the street outside the boarding house, waiting. He had not slept, had not even tried. His mind was too full of Rose, of the sound of her voice, the touch of her hand on his arm when she had thanked him. He had lost his job, of course. A rider from the Garrett ranch had found him at his boarding room at 6 a.m. to inform him that his employment was terminated immediately, and he had 1 hour to collect his belongings and vacate the premises. Jake had expected nothing less. Edward Garrett would see his testimony as the worst kind of betrayal, but Jake did not regret it. He had saved an innocent life, and more than that, he had saved Rose. That was worth any price. Worth. He had some money saved, enough to last a month or two if he was careful. He would find work at another ranch or perhaps try his hand at something different. The West was full of opportunities for a man willing to work hard. Rose appeared at 9 o'clock, looking more rested, though the shadows under her eyes told of a sleepless night. She wore the same dress from yesterday, her only possession, but she had washed her face and pinned up her hair, and Jake thought she looked like the sunrise, bringing light after the darkest night. "Good morning," she said, and there was a shyness in her voice that he found endearing. "Have you been waiting long?" "Not long," Jake lied, though he had been there for 3 hours. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm in a dream," she admitted. "I cannot quite believe I'm alive. Yesterday I was certain I would die today." Her voice trembled, and she wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm sorry, it is still so fresh." "You do not need to apologize," Jake said gently. "What you went through was terrifying. Anyone would need time to recover." He hesitated, then added, "Would you like to get some breakfast? The hotel dining room serves a decent meal, and I think you need to eat." She nodded gratefully, and they walked together through the waking town. Heads turned as they passed, whispers following in their wake. The news of her release and Carl Brewer's arrest had spread like wildfire, and Dusty Creek was buzzing with gossip. Some looks were sympathetic, others judgmental, still assessing her guilt despite the evidence of her innocence. Jake positioned himself between Rose and the onlookers, his presence a shield. Over breakfast, they talked. Rose told him about her life, about growing up in the orphanage in St. Louis, about coming west 2 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. She spoke of her love for the wide open spaces, the way the sunsets painted the sky in colors she had never seen in the city. She talked about her dreams of saving enough money to open a small bakery, to have her own business and her own place in the world. Jake listened, fascinated by every word, learning about the woman he had saved. In turn, he shared his own story. He had been born in Oklahoma, the son of a horse trader who died when Jake was young. His mother had passed a year later, leaving him to make his own way. He had worked ranches from Texas to Colorado, learned to ride and rope, became one of the best hands in the territory, but he had never had a place that felt like home, never had roots that went deep into the soil. "I have been drifting for 12 years, Jake said, staring into his coffee cup. "Going wherever the work takes me, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. I suppose I have been lonely without realizing it." Rose reached across the table, her hand covering his. The touch sent warmth through his entire body. "You matter now," she said softly. "You mattered to me when you stood up and told the truth. You are the bravest man I have ever met, Jake Sullivan." He turned his hand over, his fingers lacing with hers, and they sat like that for a long moment, the noise of the dining room fading away until there was only the two of them, connected by more than just gratitude. The trial of Carl Brewer began a week later, and Jake testified again, this time in a packed courtroom with Edward Garrett sitting in the front row, his face carved from stone, his eyes burning with hatred every time he looked at Jake. The foreman denied everything, claimed Jake was lying, said he had been nowhere near the stables that morning, but Jake's testimony was detailed and unshakable, and when the sheriff searched Carl's quarters, they found the stolen money hidden under his floorboards, nearly $5,000 embezzled over 3 years. The evidence was damning, and the jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a guilty verdict. Carl Brewer was sentenced to hang, the same fate Rose would have suffered if Jake had remained silent. As the verdict was read, Carl twisted in his seat, his eyes finding Jake in the gallery. "You are a dead man, Sullivan," he shouted. "Garrett will make sure of it. You crossed the wrong people." The bailiff dragged him away, still shouting threats, but Jake sat motionless, Rose beside him, her hand in his. Edward Garrett rose and left the courtroom without a word, but the look he gave Jake promised that Carl's threats were not empty. Jake had made powerful enemies, and he knew his life in Dusty Creek had become dangerous. After the trial, Jake and Rose stood outside the courthouse in the fading afternoon light. "I need to leave town," Jake said quietly. "Edward Garrett will not forgive me for what I did. He may have lost Carl, but he still has money and influence, and men who will do his bidding for the right price." Rose's grip on his hand tightened. "Then I'm coming with you." He looked at her startled. "Rose, you do not have to do that. You are free now. You can go anywhere. Start fresh." "I know," she said, her blue eyes meeting his steadily, "and I choose to go with you. This past week, talking with you every day, getting to know you, it has been the happiest time of my life despite everything. You saved me, Jake, but it is more than gratitude. I feel something for you, something real and true. If you will have me, I want to face whatever comes next together." Jake's heart felt too large for his chest, and he pulled her close, not caring who saw, not caring about propriety or appearances. "I have been half in love with you since the first moment I saw you at the ranch," he confessed. "I just never thought someone like you would look twice at a drifter cowboy like me. If you want to come with me, Rose, there's nothing I would want more in this world." She smiled up at him, the first real smile he had seen on her face, and it transformed her entirely, erasing the shadows and fear, leaving only joy. "Then we leave together. Where should we go?" "I have heard there is work in New Mexico territory," Jake said, his mind already planning. Silver mines opening up, new towns being built. We could head west, start over where no one knows us, where Garrett's reach does not extend. That sounds perfect, Rose said. When do we leave? Tomorrow, Jake decided. The sooner we are gone from Dusty Creek, the safer we will be. They spent the evening preparing for departure, pooling their meager resources. Jake had enough money for 2 horses, supplies, and a little extra for emergencies. Rose had only what the town council had given her as restitution for her wrongful imprisonment, $50 that felt like blood money, but was necessary for survival. They met at the general store at dawn, loading their saddlebags with provisions, dried beef, hardtack, coffee, beans, blankets, ammunition for Jake's rifle. The storekeeper, an older man named Henry who had always been kind, watched them with knowing eyes. "Heading out?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Jake said. "Time for a fresh start?" Henry nodded slowly. "I do not blame you. Garrett has been in here twice asking about you, and his questions were not friendly." He paused, then added quietly, "You did the right thing, son. Do not let anyone tell you different. That girl would be dead if not for you, and that bastard brewer would still be stealing and killing." "Thank you," Jake said, feeling a lump in his throat at the unexpected support. Henry glanced at Rose, then back at Jake. "Take care of her, and take this." He pulled a small derringer from under the counter, pressing it into Rose's hand. "Just in case. A woman should be able to protect herself on the trail." Rose's eyes widened, but she accepted the weapon with a nod of gratitude. "I do not know how to shoot." "Point and pull the trigger," Henry said simply, "and pray you never have to use it." They left Dusty Creek as the sun rose, riding west through the prairie grass that stretched endlessly in every direction. Jake kept a watchful eye behind them, but no riders followed. Perhaps Garrett had decided they were not worth pursuing, or perhaps he was simply biding his time. Either way, Jake felt the tension in his shoulders ease with every mile they put between themselves and the town. Rose rode well, comfortable in the saddle, and they made good time. They talked as they traveled, the conversation flowing easily, learning more about each other with every passing hour. Jake found himself laughing at her stories from the orphanage, tales of mischief and sisterhood among the girls. She listened with rapt attention to his accounts of cattle drives and wild horses, asking questions that showed genuine interest. As afternoon faded to evening, they found a spot near a creek to make camp. Jake unsaddled the horses while Rose gathered firewood, working together with an ease that felt natural, as if they had been partners for years instead of days. Over a simple dinner of beans and coffee, they sat close by the fire, shoulders touching, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I should be terrified," Rose said softly. "I have no idea what the future holds, where we will end up, what we will do. But I am not scared. I feel safer with you than I have ever felt anywhere." Jake turned to look at her, the firelight painting gold across her features. "I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you stay safe," he promised. "I swear it, Rose." She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, and they sat like that for a long time. Two souls who had found each other in the midst of chaos and darkness, clinging to the hope that they could build something better together. They traveled for 3 weeks, following the trails west through Texas and into New Mexico territory. The landscape changed gradually, the flat grasslands giving way to rolling hills, then mesas and mountains that scraped the sky. They passed through small towns and trading posts, never staying more than a night, always moving forward. Jake found work along the way, a day here and there helping with roundups or repairs, earning enough money to replenish their supplies and keep them going. In a small town called Socorro, they stopped at a church, and Jake asked Rose a question that had been building in his heart since they left Dusty Creek. "Marry me," he said simply, holding both her hands in his. "I know it has only been a month, but I know my heart, and I know I want to spend every day for the rest of my life with you. If you will have me, Rose, I will do everything in my power to make you happy." Tears filled her eyes, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said without hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Jake Sullivan. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you walked into that courthouse and saved my life, and I have fallen deeper every day since. They were married by the local priest that afternoon, with the church secretary and a kind Mexican woman who ran the boarding house standing as witnesses. Rose wore a simple blue dress they bought from the general store, and Jake wore his cleanest shirt and his one good pair of pants. They exchanged vows in Spanish and English, promising to love and cherish each other through all the trials life might bring. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Rose with all the love and tenderness in his heart, and she kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, holding him close. They spent their wedding night in a real hotel room, the first privacy they had shared. Jake was gentle and patient, and Rose responded to his touch with a passion that surprised them both. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies, whispering words of love and desire, cementing their union in the most intimate way possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Rose's head on Jake's chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I never thought I could be this happy," Rose murmured. "I thought my life would be nothing but work and struggle, that love was something that happened to other people, not orphan girls with no prospects." "You are not an orphan anymore," Jake said, kissing the top of her head. "You have me and I have you. We are a family now, Rose Sullivan." She lifted her head, her eyes shining. "Rose Sullivan. I like the sound of that." They continued west, husband and wife now, their bond deepening with every shared sunrise and sunset. In a town called Silver City, Jake found work at a ranch owned by a man named Thomas Crawford, a weathered cattleman in his 50s who was expanding his operation and needed experienced hands. Crawford took an immediate liking to Jake, impressed by his skills and work ethic, and offered him a permanent position with good wages and a small cabin on the property. The cabin was simple but sturdy, 2 rooms with a fireplace and a porch that looked out over the mountains. Rose stood in the doorway that first day, her eyes taking in the space, and Jake felt a moment of worry that it was not enough, that she deserved better. But she turned to him with joy written across her face. "It is perfect," she said. "It is ours. We finally have a home, Jake." They settled into their new life with gratitude and determination. Jake worked the ranch, proving himself indispensable to Crawford. Rose found work in town, baking for the hotel restaurant. Her dream of owning a bakery delayed but not forgotten. They saved every penny they could, planning for the future, building something that belonged to them alone. The months passed in a blur of work and love. Rose's baking became famous in Silver City, and the hotel owner offered her more hours, more pay. Jake was promoted to foreman after the previous foreman retired, a position of responsibility and respect that came with a significant increase in wages. They were thriving, their life together better than either had dared to dream during those dark days in Dusty Creek. On their 6-month anniversary, Rose told Jake she was pregnant. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, his heart overflowing with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. "Rose, we are going to be parents." "I know," she said, her hand resting on her still, flat stomach. "I am terrified and excited and so happy I could burst. Are you ready to be a father?" "I am ready for anything as long as I have you," Jake promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, Rose glowing with health and happiness. She continued working until her 7th month, then reluctantly agreed to stay home and prepare for the baby's arrival. Jake was protective almost to a fault, constantly worrying, making sure she had everything she needed. Thomas Crawford and his wife Martha took Rose under their wing, Martha spending hours with her, sharing advice and wisdom about childbirth and motherhood. In late March of 1883, on a cool evening when the desert was painted in shades of purple and gold, Rose went into labor. The midwife arrived quickly, and Martha Crawford stayed by Rose's side, holding her hand, offering encouragement. Jake paced outside, his nerves frayed, every cry from Rose cutting through him like a knife. The hours crawled by and he prayed harder than he had ever prayed, begging God to keep Rose safe, to bring their child into the world healthy and whole. Just before midnight, the thin cry of a newborn pierced the air, and Jake's knees went weak with relief. The midwife emerged moments later, a tired smile on her face. "You have a son," she announced, "a healthy boy with strong lungs. Your wife did beautifully." Jake rushed inside to find Rose propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. "Jake, come meet our son." He approached slowly, almost reverently, looking down at the tiny face peering out from the blankets. The baby had Rose's delicate features and a shock of dark hair. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. Jake reached out a finger, and his son's tiny hand wrapped around it, the grip surprisingly strong. Something broke open in Jake's chest, a well of love so deep and powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. "He is beautiful," Jake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He looks just like you." "He has your eyes," Rose said, smiling. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, but had never quite settled on one. Now, holding his son, Jake knew exactly what felt right. "How about Henry? After the storekeeper in Dusty Creek who helped us, he was a good man, and I want our son to be named after goodness." Rose's eyes softened. "Henry Sullivan. I love it. Welcome to the world, Henry." The first year of Henry's life passed in a beautiful chaos of sleepless nights and countless small joys. Jake had never known he could love anything as much as he loved his son and his wife. He would come home from long days on the range to find Rose singing to Henry, or playing with him on a blanket in the sunshine. The sound of his son's laughter became Jake's favorite sound in the world. Rose eventually did open her bakery, a small storefront in Silver City that she ran 3 days a week, with Martha Crawford watching Henry while Rose worked. The bakery was an immediate success, and soon Rose was making more money than Jake, a fact that made him proud rather than threatened. They were partners in every sense, building a life together, supporting each other's dreams. 2 years after Henry was born, Rose announced she was pregnant again. This time Jake was calmer, more confident, though no less thrilled. Their daughter arrived in the autumn of 1885, a tiny girl with honey-colored hair like her mother and a temperament as sweet as sugar. They named her Grace because she was grace itself, a blessing they had not dared to expect. Life continued to be good to the Sullivan family. Jake and Rose worked hard, loved harder, and raised their children with values of honesty, kindness, and courage. They told Henry and Grace when they were old enough to understand about how their father had saved their mother's life, about the importance of standing up for truth even when it was difficult and dangerous. The children listened with wide eyes, proud of their parents, understanding that they came from love forged in fire and tested by adversity. The bakery expanded, and Rose hired help, becoming a successful businesswoman respected throughout Silver City. Jake became a partner in the Crawford Ranch, Thomas having no children of his own and viewing Jake as the son he never had. The little cabin was expanded into a proper house with room for the growing family and guests. Years passed in a blur of contentment. Henry grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses and books in equal measure. Grace was bright and cheerful, always singing, always finding joy in the smallest things. Jake and Rose watched their children grow with wonder and gratitude, never taking a single day for granted. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jake and Rose stood on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, the same mountains they had ridden toward a decade earlier, two desperate people fleeing toward an uncertain future. "Do you ever think about Dusty Creek?" Rose asked, leaning against her husband. "Sometimes," Jake admitted. "I wonder what became of Edward Garrett, whether he ever forgave me for telling the truth." "It does not matter," Rose said firmly. What matters is that we found each other, that we built this life. You gave me everything, Jake. You gave me freedom, love, family, happiness. I would go through all of it again, even the terror of that cell, if it meant ending up here with you. Jake turned to her, cupping her face in his hands, looking at the woman who had been his salvation as much as he had been hers. I love you, Rose Sullivan. I loved you the moment I saw you, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. She kissed him, deep and sweet, a kiss that held a decade of love and passion and partnership. I love you too, Jake, always and forever. Inside the house, they could hear Henry reading to Grace, the sound of their children's voices, the sweetest music. The bakery was thriving, the ranch was prosperous, and the Sullivan family was whole and happy. The gallows that once stood ready for Rose were long gone, torn down and forgotten. Justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and two people who had every reason to be destroyed by tragedy had instead found each other and built something beautiful. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Jake wrapped his arms around his wife, and they stood together. Two survivors who had become victors. Two lonely souls who had found home in each other. The West was still wild, still dangerous, still full of hardship and struggle, but it was also full of possibility, redemption, and second chances. Jake and Rose had claimed their second chance with both hands and refused to let go. Their story, which had begun in darkness and despair, had transformed into something luminous and lasting. The cowboy who found his courage and the woman who survived injustice had not only found freedom but had found love. The kind of love that poets write about and people dream of. The kind of love that lasts a lifetime and beyond. And in the little town of Silver City, New Mexico Territory, in a house full of laughter and love, the Sullivan family lived not just happily ever after, but purposefully, gratefully, completely. Every day was a gift, every moment together a treasure, every sunrise a reminder that they had beaten the darkness and emerged into the light together. Jake would sometimes think about that moment in the saloon when he decided to speak up, when he chose courage over cowardice, truth over silence. It was the best decision he ever made, not just because it saved Rose's life, but because it allowed him to become the man he was meant to be. And Rose, when she looked at her husband, her children, her successful business, her beautiful life, knew that survival was not enough. She had not just survived, she had thrived, had built something magnificent from the ashes of despair. They grew old together, Jake and Rose, their love deepening with each passing year. Henry grew up to become a lawyer, fighting for justice in the courts, inspired by his father's courage and his mother's resilience. Grace became a teacher, spreading knowledge and kindness, embodying the best of both her parents. The bakery became a Silver City institution, and the ranch prospered under Jake's management. On quiet evenings, when the children were grown and the house was peaceful, Jake and Rose would sit on their porch holding hands, watching the sun set over the mountains they had crossed together so many years before. They never took their happiness for granted, never forgot how close they came to losing everything before they even began. "Do you have any regrets?" Rose asked one evening, when they were both gray-haired and weathered by time and sun. Jake considered the question seriously, then shook his head. "Not a single one. Every choice I made, every road I took led me to you. That makes everything worthwhile." Rose smiled, the same smile that had captivated him decades ago, still beautiful, still full of light. "Then we are the luckiest people alive, because I feel exactly the same way." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Jake Sullivan and Rose Sullivan sat together in the home they built, surrounded by the life they created. Proof that even in the wildest, harshest landscape, love could take root and flourish, could transform tragedy into triumph, could turn two lonely drifters into a family that would last for generations. Their grandchildren would come to visit, wide-eyed and eager to hear the story of how Grandpa saved Grandma from the gallows, how he stood up and told the truth when everyone else stayed silent, how they rode into the sunset together and built an empire of love and success from nothing but courage and devotion. And Jake and Rose would tell the story, their hands clasped together, their voices weaving the tale of the best thing that ever happened to both of them, finding each other when they needed it most, and choosing love every single day after. The Wild West was tamed over time, the lawless towns becoming civilized cities, the open ranges giving way to farms and settlements. But the Sullivan family remained, a testament to the enduring power of truth, justice, and love that conquered all obstacles. Jake's decision to testify had saved more than Rose's life. It had created an entire legacy, a family tree that would spread across generations, all rooted in that one moment of courage in a dark saloon when a cowboy decided that an innocent woman's life was worth more than his fear. And so they lived, Jake and Rose Sullivan, not just happily ever after, but meaningfully, purposefully surrounded by love and success and the unshakable knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. A love that was tested by fire and emerged stronger, purer, unbreakable. The gallows never claimed Rose and cowardice never claimed Jake. And together they built a life that proved beyond any doubt that doing the right thing, no matter the cost, was always, always worth it.